Now, things get even more interesting because we're looking at richer elements, not just for clicking, but for entering and changing text, making choices, and specifying preferences. This is all done using forms and controls. That is, the form element, along with a variety of elements called controls. For example, your user might see something like this, which is one form with 7 input elements or controls. We have lots to discuss. Let's get to it. A form element is a container that includes input elements, as well as possibly other elements nested within. Input elements allow the user to enter data, as a text string, a checkbox, a radio button, and more. Then when the user is ready, he or she clicks a Submit button. The form gathers together all the input data, formats it, then sends it to a destination. Although the destination could be another web page, it is almost always sent to a program on the server. And this program is called a CGI program, or often just a CGI. CGI stands for Common Gateway Interface. The name comes from the fact that originally this was thought of as a common interface between clients and web page servers and database servers, a gateway. A CGI generally accepts the data that was sent to it and creates a response, usually a new or modified page to be displayed. A CGI may also create, update, or delete files on the server and update information in a database on the server, and even send an email. It is all server-side work. We don't discuss how to program CGIs in this course. That information is found in the advanced course. However, I have provided 2 CGI programs written in a language called PHP in your web files directory, the CGIs subdirectory. These programs simply display the values in some variables. In addition, I have supplied one simple CGI, actually an HTML page, that can be used to test your lab solutions if you're not able to have server-side CGIs set up for you. Its name is pretendcgi.html. It simply displays the data passed from a form. You might need to talk to your ISP to make certain that support for running server-side CGIs is set up. If you're okay to do that, you can use CGIs/simple_CGI_get.php and CGIs/simple_CGI_post.php for testing your lab solutions. Otherwise, you can fall back on pretendcgi.html. Let's start by examining the form element. The purpose is to identify how to handle and where to route input data received from the user. The syntax is a start tag, form, always have some attributes, then the content of the form, and the end tag. The start tag and end tag are both required. The form content consists of just about any element that can be specified in the body element, but the important useful elements are input elements. Useful global attributes, the usual suspects. Useful attributes specifically for form elements are as follows. Action. Identify the destination of the form data, the URL of a CGI or web page. Method. The transmission method to use to send data to the CGI, usually either get or post. Use get if you're not actually changing anything on the server and just passing some character string data. There is a length restriction. Basically, it needs to be less than 2048 bytes. Do not use get when sending passwords or other sensitive information, because it goes in the clear. It's only good for character string data. Use post if you're uploading files or starting something that will change data on the server. There's no length restriction, and you can send any binary type data. In this session, we focus on using the get method. The enctype attribute. Specify the technique for encoding the data before transmitting to the CGI. One of these. application/x-www-form-URL encoded. And this is the default. Spaces are converted to plus signs. Special characters are converted to their ASCII hex values. This is used with GET. The multi-part /form-data you must use if you're uploading one or more files as part of the controls in the form, used with POST. And text/plain, sometimes used with GET if passing a file name. Spaces are converted to plus, but no further conversion. Events you may want to provide handlers for. OnSubmit. This could be used to launch some validation logic or to take some action then cancel the form submission. OnReset could be used to change values or even to cancel the reset. Note, in a form's OnSubmit event handler, you can use something like OnSubmit equals return report parent. This will invoke the user-written function report, and if this function returns false, the submit will be canceled. Example, form, action equals webfiles/simple_CGI_get.php. Method equals get. So a form element sets the stage. Other elements nested within the form can provide information, background, instructions, but most important are embedded controls, and most important of those are input elements. The input element. Its purpose is to specify the type and possibly the size and/or format of data the user is expected to enter, based on a type attribute which is discussed shortly and several other attributes. The syntax, a start tag, input with attributes. The start tag is required, an end tag is forbidden. Possibly useful global attributes here, the usual suspects. Useful non-global attributes for input. Name, an identifier that will be passed to the CGI and is required. Value, the value that will be passed to the CGI. And type, what kind of data is accepted. In the standard, these are called states, and the most useful here are the following. Text. The value is expected to be a single line of plain text. This is the default type. The user is able to key in data and the result will be the value passed to the CGI. Tell. The value is expected to be a telephone number. URL. The value is expected to be a valid URL. Email. The value is expected to be an email address. Password. The value is obscured as it is keyed in. Checkbox, rendered as a box that is checked or not. Radio. Usually several radio elements are grouped such the user can select one and only one of the group. Radio buttons, we say. Submit, a button that, when clicked, will format and submit the control data to the CGI. Reset, a button that, when clicked, will clear all the input controls in the form. And button, a plain button with no predetermined action. Some notes on this type. We'll look at more possible types later. Types tell, URL, email, and password are all text fields that include some special attributes that browsers can verify. A little more detail later. Every form should include one input element of type submit. Additional attributes useful for input are size, the number of characters displayed for text type fields. It's used to determine the size of the space allowed on the page. Max length, the maximum number of characters allowed for text type fields. Note, if max length is greater than size, the content is scrollable in the field. Min length, the minimum number of characters allowed for text type fields. Required. This is also Boolean. If a required field is not set, then the browser issues an error message. So, when a submit button is clicked, any on-click event handler is run. If this returns false, the submit is canceled. This allows you to run a checking routine to screen data before it is submitted to the CGI. Controls with the required attribute are checked to see if they have been set. If not, the user is directed to the unset field with an error message. Controls with min-length criteria are checked to see if they have at least that many characters entered. If not, the user is directed to the short field with an error message. Controls of type URL are checked to see if the value is a valid URL format. If not, the user is directed to the field with an error message. Controls of type email are checked to see if the value is a valid email format, and if not, the user is directed to the field with an error message. A data string is built consisting of the names and values for successful controls in the format indicated by enctype attribute for the form. And this is called the form dataset. Generally speaking, a control is considered to be successful if it has a value. Controls that are disabled cannot be successful. Controls that are hidden can be successful. Reset buttons are never considered successful. So, control is then passed to the resource pointed to in the action attribute of the form, using the method indicated in the form, passing the form dataset, to the server variable named query_string. The request is handled by the CGI, including returning an HTML page to the client. So let's explore some input element types. For type equals text, you might find these attributes useful. Use name equals to specify the name passed to the CGI. Use value equal to establish an initial value. Use size equal to specify the amount of room to render on the display, the number of characters to reserve space for on the screen. And you might use max length to restrict the number of characters to enter. Events you may want to provide handlers for: click, double-click, focus, blur, select, change. These last four are new and discussed later. Here's an example. We have an H2. Here is a form. And then our form element, action equals pretend CGI.html, method equals get. A paragraph, simple text input controls, new line, break, break. First name, input, type equals text, name equals F_N, like for first name. MI, input, type equals text, size equals 1, name equals MI for middle initial. Family name, input, type equals text, value equals Jones, name equals L_N for last name. End of paragraph, end of form. And that displays this way, which is okay, but maybe not the best. Notice, even though we stacked the input elements in the code, they render as a string of inputs. So we need to force new lines, use the BR element. The first name and family name elements did not have size equal, so the browser chose a default, while we did specify a size for the middle initial. And the family name field is pre-filled in with the value equal we specified. This can, of course, be replaced by typing in the box. Suppose we try this, which is the same code we had before, but we add two BR elements after the first name and the middle initial, and then we get this. Wouldn't it be nice if the boxes lined up better? Well, remember many lessons ago, we talked about how to line up text. There are two parts to make this happen. First, use a monospace font. And second, use the non-breaking space semicolon spaces so that spaces are not simply collapsed into one. Now it turns out you can use non-space characters also, and we've found that using periods, dots, can be visually effective. And you can also use a single regular space just fine. So now we modify the code to this, and in the front of the P element we add a style attribute. Font family monospace, font weight bold, font size 12 point. And this gives us this. I'm sure you can see other ways to change this sort of thing to meet your personal style or aesthetics from here. If we look at input with type equals password, text entered by the user is rendered as a string of X's or asterisks, depending on the browser. Other than that, it's a text-like type. So useful attributes would be name equals to specify the name passed to the CGI. Use size equal to specify the amount of room to render on the display, the number of characters to reserve space for. Use max length to restrict the number of characters to enter, and use min length to require a minimum size password. Events you may want to provide handlers for: click, double-click, focus, blur, select, and change. If you use type equals tell, type equals URL, or type equals email, these are all text-like types. So the same sets of attributes and events as for type equals text apply. Now, type equals tell is more informational than anything else. There is no testing. But URL, type equals URL, the browser will test that it contains a valid URL format, but not if it's an actual URL. And similarly, if type equals email, the browser will test it has a valid email format, but not if it is an actual email address. For type equals checkbox, the browser will render checking and unchecking, and the user can select 0 or more of the boxes in a form. Useful attributes: name equals to specify the name passed to the CGI. Value equals must be specified. This is what is sent back to the CGI if the box is checked. And then checked is a Boolean attribute. You can specify this to preset a checkbox. Events you may want to provide handlers for: click or change. Here's another example. I've made some modifications of our previous example and added some new code. For our H2, I changed the text to say sign up for our trip to Japan, just to give it some coherence in the whole form. Then in the first paragraph, I changed the initial text to tell us your name. And then the first name, middle initial, family name as before. And then an extra blank line, an extra paragraph if you will. And then a new paragraph with style of font weight bold and font size 12 point. Doesn't have to be monospace in this case. Indicate which features you would like to include. Break. Input type equals checkbox, value equals 1, name equals feat 1, like feature 1. Horseback riding, new line. Input type equals checkbox, value equals 1, name equals feat 2. Motorcycle trip, new line. Input type equals checkbox, value equals 1, name equals feat 3. Fabrics and textiles, new line. And input type equals checkbox, value equal 1, name equals feat 4, a foodie trip. And then end of paragraph, end of form. And the resulting page displays like this. Notice how if we put the associated text, like horseback riding and so on, after the input element, at least for checkboxes, we don't need to worry about lining things up. Type equals radio. The browser will render checking and unchecking. Radio buttons are grouped together by having the same name value. Exactly one button in each group must be checked. If no button is explicitly checked, the first button in the group is implicitly checked. Useful attributes. Use name equal to specify the name passed to the CGI. Value equal must be specified. This is what is sent back to the CGI if the button is checked. Each button in a group should have a unique value specified, so the CGI can determine which button has been selected. Checked Boolean attribute, you can specify to preset one button in a group. Events you may want to provide handlers for, click and change. This example, we add some new code. In particular, we add a paragraph with style, font weight, bold, font size 12 point. Indicate your skill level in Japanese language. New line, new line. Input, type equals radio, value equals F, name equals lang. Fluent, new line. Input, type equals radio, value equals I, name equals lang. Intermediate, new line. Input, type equals radio, value equals B, name equals lang. Basic, new line. Input, type equals radio, value equals N, name equals lang, none. And paragraph and form. See the application of radio buttons. The user could only have one skill level. Well, okay, in real life there might be a range like I'm fair to good or some such, but you get the point. And this displays this way. Type equals submit, type equals reset, and type equals button. These types of input elements all render as a button, a gray shaded rectangle with black text, with subtle differences among browsers. If you specify value equals some text, then the button will be labeled with that text. Otherwise, for type equals submit, the default text is either submit or submit query, depending on your browser. For type equals reset, the default text is reset. For type equals button, the default text is simply blank. Some useful attributes: use name equal to specify the name passed to the CGI, and value equals as described above with the text. An event you may want to provide a handler for any of these, click. Note that in a form on submit event handler or a submit button on click event handler, you can use something like on submit or on click equals return space report parent. This will invoke the user-written function report, and if this function returns false, the submit will be canceled. The processing. Well, the submit button processing we discussed earlier. For reset processing, all controls in the form are set to their initial value if they have a value equals attribute, or undefined. No data is sent to the server. A plain button has no default processing, but this is a possible place to include an on-click event handler that might invoke a script to validate the values entered in the form. Example. Sticking with the form we've been playing with, we just add a submit and a reset button. So at the bottom of the form, we add input type equals submit, value equals sign up, amper non-breaking space, amper non-breaking space, input type equals reset. And it gives us this. We've spent some time exploring how to gather data from your viewers. Construct a form, consisting of a form element and nested elements. A form element should include action and method attributes at the very least. In this session, we use the get method everywhere. While just about any HTML element that can appear in the body is allowed inside a form, the input element is one place where data is gathered. There are others, which we will see later. All elements that accept data in a form are collectively called controls, or control elements. We saw that the input element can take many characteristics depending on these attributes: name, value, size, max length, min length, required, and type, where we examined these types: text, tell, URL, email, password, checkbox, radio, submit, reset, and button. While it is somewhat frustrating right now not to be able to do anything with the data you gather, we're playing a long game here. building up the tools you will need to make your websites truly interactive. For now, you can use the following actions and methods in your forms. Action equals CGIs slash simple underscore CGI underscore get.php with method equals get. And this works if you are allowed to run CGI programs on your server. It simply displays past data and some useful server-side data values. Or action equals pretend CGI.html with method equals get. This works locally, so if you're not allowed to run CGIs, this will at least let you look at data that has been gathered. Let's take a moment and demonstrate both of these options. Let's demonstrate how both of our CGI handling tools that we provide work for you. First, this one here, we're working with the one that's actually on my server in the CGIs directory. And I'll just put in my first name. I'll leave the middle initial blank. I'll leave Jones there. Let's say I want to go on a foodie trip, and my knowledge of Japanese is pretty basic. So I'm going to do that, and then go over to the other one, which is the pretending CGI, excuse me, and put in the same information so we can compare what the results are. So here I'll click on the real CGI, and this is the output. You'll see it just gives me some variable information like here's my server, stillpluggingaway.com, and the script name, simple CGI get PHP, and the query string, that's the form data that gets built. So the first name is Steve, and the middle initial is not supplied, and last name is Jones, and feature equals 1, and language equals B. And there's some other information I had put out. On the other one, this is run locally, doesn't use the CGI, and you get this. And if I click this string, I see the query string values that we had before. Click OK. And if I click here, I just broke out the variables and their values, and then you can clear the list and re-show it if you like. So that's the two tools that are available. In the next video, we examine some additional input types and look at using the post method. See you there.